Here we go with an episode of Muscles and Magic the Gathering. Now, Muscles and Magic the Gathering, my two greatest passions. You've seen me fight in the UFC, you've seen me in the pages of Men's Health, but I also absolutely love Magic the Gathering. And this episode, this series is all things Magic the Gathering. This episode in particular, we're going to talk about one of my favorite commanders of all time, the one, the only, the incomparable Edgar Markov. I think he's one of the best and most powerful commanders in the game. And I also have a deep love of vampires and vampire mythology. So this guy has always been one of my favorites. And you just saw him become a whole new generation's favorite with the release of Innistrad Remastered. So today, we're going to do a little Commanders for Dummies breakdown of my Edgar Markov deck. Now, Edgar's regarded as one of the most powerful commanders. One of the reasons why is the eminence keyword. Whenever you cast another vampire spell, if Edgar Markov is in the command zone or on the battlefield, create a 1/1 black vampire creature token. The reason this is so powerful is you don't have to get this guy on the battlefield to make him do work for you. As long as he's in the command zone, you will get that bonus. But as an added bonus, if he does get on the battlefield, which he will in a game of Commander probably multiple times, every single time he attacks, he gets a +1/+1 counter. He puts a +1/+1 counter on every other vampire that you control. So there will be some stuff in this deck to obviously pay attention to both of these things, right? Whenever I build a commander deck, I look at the words on the card and I think, how can I make this work for me? To break this down in really simple terms, I'm going to build a vampire kinfolk deck. The more vampires I can cast, the more of those 1/1 tokens I'm going to get. And then I'm going to make it so Edgar Markov can attack, so I can get that +1/+1 counter on every single vampire. So I will include some cards to support that. In this video, I'm going to break this down step by step. What cards I include, like in terms of Planeswalkers, Sorceries, Instants, what artifacts I include, and then some various simple combos that I use. But I like to keep things simple. Listen, I started playing Magic 30 years ago, and I started with just a 60-card deck format. I also collected a lot. In the last couple of years, I've been really getting into Commander, but the learning curve can be incredibly high. It's such a complex game. So we're going to keep this simple, and whether you're an absolute beginner to the game or you're really advanced and looking for a few more key combos to fill out your deck, it's learning time, and you're going to get something out of this. So obviously, we went over Edgar Markov and how he works. Now I'm going to explain the Planeswalkers that I have, and I chose 3. Now, ideally, in an ultra-competitive deck, I might only have 1 Planeswalkers or no Planeswalkers at all. But I do like to collect for collecting's sake. I do want a vampire tribal, and I do need Sorin, the Prince of the Vampires, and I chose 3. Sorin, Imperious Bloodlord, Sorin the Mirthless, and Sorin Markov. Now, one thing I want to highlight in this video for people that are new to Magic is the casting cost, right? This only has a casting cost of essentially 3. 1 swamp, 2 colorless. This has a casting cost of 4. 2 swamps, 2 colorless. This has a casting cost of 6. 3 black mana, or 3 swamps, and 3 colorless. This is going to take longer to bring out than this. So in general, in your deck, you want the casting cost of your creatures or your Planeswalkers to be as low as possible. The total mana value of this deck for the advanced people, nerds that are really into Magic, is 194. Anything under 200 is a deck that's going to move really, really fast. And generally, if it's built right, it's going to be really competitive. But if I do have a card that's got a high casting cost, like this Sorin, it's got to do work for me. Now, when I look at this card, when you bring it out, it's got 4 loyalty counters on it, which means I can activate its second ability right away. Target opponent's life total becomes 10. In a game of Commander, where there's 40 life, you can knock somebody down to 10 right away. That's a great, great card. And its final ability, if it resolves, I get to control a target player during that next player's turn. That can be a game ender. That can be a game changer. So those are the 3 Planeswalkers that I chose. Now for creatures. Generally, in my decks, I like to run a lower amount of creatures because I like support by way of instants or enchantments. Some people would argue that I need more creatures, but my creatures are going to do some work. So the first creature I have in here is the Bloodthirsty Conqueror from Magic's one of their newer sets called Foundations. It's got flying, it's got death touch, and whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. It's got a higher casting cost, but it's a 5/5, and I do like the words. Whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. Why do I like that so much? Because look how it pairs with Veto Thorn of the Dusk Rose. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. So let's just read that again. Whenever an opponent loses life, I gain life. Whenever I gain life, an opponent loses life. If I can figure out a way to attack an opponent and make them lose life, or figure out a way for me to gain life, this becomes an infinite combo that will kill somebody immediately. And a lot of the cards that I put into this deck have words like that written on the cards because I want more than just one way to get my combo, right? The Marauding Blight Priest, whenever you gain life, each opponent loses a life. So again, fits in with the synergy of these cards. When you're building a deck, you want to have a bunch of cards that work together. There are cards that by themselves are just super powerful. Something like, for example, this right here. The Enlightened Tutor, right? I can just search my library for an artifact enchantment card. That does that one thing, and it's super, super good. But for a lot of these creatures, a lot of the other cards, you want some synergy. And that's one of the synergies and one of the things you see again and again and again in this deck. There's actually three things I'm trying to do with this Markov deck. Number one, I want to build a ton of vampires. Two, I want to pump them through the roof with all kinds of Vampire Anthem type effects. And then three, I've got these cards that work in synergy. Whenever an opponent loses a life, I gain a life, etc., right? So we got the Marauding Blight Priest, the Blood Letter of Alkazolz. If an opponent would lose life during your turn, they lose twice that much life instead. So again, the synergy with these cards. Mirkwood Bats. Super underrated card. You can get this for under $1. Now, a lot of people who are new to Magic are like, wow, some of these cards are incredibly expensive. And this deck is an expensive deck. It's worth about $2,400. But some of the best cards in it aren't necessarily the expensive ones, right? Look at this Mirkwood Bats. Whenever you create or sacrifice a token, each opponent loses a life. Well, now let's look at how that works with our hero, Edgar Markov. If I cast a vampire, I create a 1/1 black vampire token. When I create that token, Mirkwood Bats deals each opponent 1 life, and each opponent is really important, right? I like cards that, say each opponent, because in a game of Commander, you have 3 other people at the table. So if you're playing a game with 4 people in it, you want to damage as many people as much as possible. So I absolutely love this card. It goes heavy in this deck. We have the Stormkirk Captain. All vampires get +1/+1 and have first strike, kind of like a Vampire Anthem effect. The Cordial Vampire. Whenever a Cordial Vampire or another creature dies, put a 1/1 counter on each vampire you control. So again, one of those 3 themes I talked about, right? The Vampire Anthem. The Twilight Prophet, another great card. At the beginning of my upkeep, if I have the City's Blessing, that means I have 10 tokens. Reveal the top card of your library and put it into your hand. Each opponent loses X life and you gain X life, where X is that card's converted mana cost. So yeah, some life gain, some life loss for the opponent, and it helps me with card draw. Forerunner of the Legion, another great card. It acts as a vampire tutor. When he enters the battlefield, I can search my library for a vampire card, reveal it, and then shuffle my library and put that card on top of it. So it's a way to tutor for a vampire that you need, and that becomes super useful with something like the Bloodthirsty Conqueror, right? I need a Bloodthirsty Conqueror on the field to get my infinite combo, but I don't pull it out of my deck. It's a 100-card deck. I might not see it over the course of a few games, but if I get the Forerunner Legion, I can go find this guy, all right? Olivia Voldaren, another great vampire. Olivia Voldaren deals 1 damage to another target creature. That's if you use a mana ability. The creature becomes a vampire in addition to its other types. Put a 1/1 counter on Olivia Voldaren. So basically what I can do is I can deal damage to one of your creatures, and then with her second ability, gain control of target vampire for as long as you control Olivia Voldaren. I can start snatching up your creatures. Great way to play defense. Dracula the Voyager, it's Edgar Charmed Groom, another version of Edgar. Acts as a vampire anthem. Other vampires you control get +1/+1. Drana Inland Vala, a way to shut down the activated abilities of my opponents and in a way steal them and use them. Captivating Vampire, another great card, a way to steal people's creatures. Other vampire creatures you control get +1/+1. There's that theme again. Vampire Anthem. I've got so many cards in here that give your vampires +1/+1. All of a sudden, Edgar Markov, you know, he makes that 1/1 vampire token and it comes out and it's a 10/10, right? Vein Ripper, another incredible card. Whenever a creature dies, target opponent loses 2 life and you gain 2 life. Drawn to the Last Blood Chief. Charismatic Conqueror. This card does some serious work. I think it's one of the most underrated cards in the Magic universe, and not just for vampire decks, for any deck. Whenever an artifact or creature enters the battlefield untapped and under an opponent's control, they may tap that permanent. If they don't, you create a 1/1 white vampire creature token with lifelink. So basically, you bring out a creature. It has to come out tapped or I'm getting another token, right? Cruel Celebrant, another uncommon, another cheap card that goes really hard, especially in a vampire deck or an aristocrat deck. Whenever Cruel Celebrant or another creature or planeswalker you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. There we go. There's that secondary theme. Gain life, lose life. We have the Malachor Blood Witch. Olivia Crimson Bride, high casting cost, but a really good card. One of the reasons I like this card, and I want to explain this, is I don't play with a lot of creatures. There's 24 creatures in this deck. I need a way to get them back from the graveyard, just in case it turns into a long game. Now, with a deck like this, the mana value, like I mentioned, it was 194. Anything under 200, it's going to move fast. I'm trying to win on like turn 4 with this thing, turn 5, turn 6. But if the game does go long, this does some real work. Whenever she attacks, return target creature card from my graveyard to the battlefield, tapped and attacking. And it has, when you don't control a legendary vampire, exile that creature. But it's just a way to get me stuff back from my graveyard, which is important. Elenda the Dusk Rose, Sorin of House Markov, double-sided card. Bloodline Keeper, another great card. Bloodghast, the Blood Artist. Whenever Blood Artist or another creature dies, target player loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. And then Legion's Landing, way to make more vampire tokens. Okay, so here's the deal. I said we had 24 creatures, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 22, 23, 24. Oh, that was an enchantment, not a creature. My bad, I was going through the cards too fast. But yes, 24 creatures, and that might not be a lot, but I am making an incredible amount of tokens, and every time these tokens die, you are losing life. So now that we went on with the creatures, let's talk about the enchantments, because I misclassified Legion's Landing. I was trying to go through too fast. That happens. So Legion's Landing, when Legion Landing enters the battlefield, create a 1/1 white vampire token, and when I attack with 3 or more creatures, transform Legion's Landing, one of those double-side cards. I love the transform mechanic. So here it becomes a land where I can create a bunch of tokens. So this is a great token generator. I'm going to put this back in my sleeve here. All right, Sanguine Bond, Exquisite Blood, another infinite combo, instant death for the opponent. Whenever you gain life, target opponent loses that much life. Whenever an opponent loses life, you gain that much life. You figure out a way to gain life or attack somebody, you will end the game instantly. And again, it fits into those themes I talked about in the creatures. Black Market Connections, another card that should be really in every black deck. It does a ton of work, especially a Kinfolk deck. War Leader's Call, creatures you control get +1/+1. And whenever a creature enters the battlefield under my control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. So again, syncs up nicely with Markov the Commander because he's creating tokens. They enter the battlefield, I do damage to you. Impact Tremors, same kind of effect. Necropotence, a way to get extra cards out off the top of my deck. I think that's an auto-include in most black decks these days. Aggravated Assault, I've got all these tokens are all pumped up. I can get an extra attack phase. Mana Echoes, perfect for a Kindred type deck. Whenever a creature enters the battlefield, you may add an amount of mana equal to the number of creatures you control that share a creature type with it, so in a vampire deck, killer. Anointed Procession, a way to make double the tokens. With this card, you have this out and something like Renewed Solidarity, which is a token generator. You have a couple of cards like this out. Now you're getting 3, 4 for, 5, 10, 100 for 1 on all your tokens. You are going to flood the field with vampires, and if they're all pumped up, you're going to end the game real fast. Trouble in Pairs. This is an incredible card, and it just got named on Magic's Game Breaker list. If an opponent would begin an extra turn, that player skips that turn instead. Limiting people's extra turns is huge. An extra turn can be a game breaker, right? Whenever an opponent attacks you with 2 or more creatures, or draws their second card each turn, or casts their second spell each turn, you draw a card. Card draw is super important in Magic. The more cards you can draw through your deck, the quicker you're going to win. And then Smothering Tithe, again, a game breaker. Automatic Include punishes people for drawing cards, and if they want to pay, they pay, but you create some treasure tokens. Let's read that exactly. Whenever an opponent draws a card, that player may pay 2. If the player doesn't, you create colorless treasure artifact token. So yeah, you pay 2 or I create treasures and I go off fast. Now for some of our instants and sorceries. Enlightened Tutor, I want to go get this enchantment. I want to go get that Exquisite Blood, right? We talked about that infinite combo. Here's where this is powerful. Let's say I have Sanguine Bond on the battlefield, but I need my Exquisite Blood. Enlightened Tutor helps me go and get it. Yawgmoth's Will, incredible card, not a cheap card, right? This is what, $130, $140. I'm not in front of I am in front of a computer, but I'm not going to look it up right now. But this card can get all the cards back from my graveyard, which is great. Reanimate, get cards back from my graveyard because I only have 24 creatures. I play low creatures, but that's why I play a lot of stuff like this. Now, removal spells. I like Exile the best. Why do I like Exile the best? Because in today's day and age, people play with indestructible creatures. I want to be able to take their creatures out, and destroy does not work on indestructible. So Exile, I will take them out. One thing to note, some people think this card isn't that great. I mean, I don't know who thinks that, but I'm sure there are some noobs out there that look at this and think that, because Exile target creature, its controller gains life equal to its power. Like, I don't want to give the other guy life. Listen, with this vampire deck, I'm making so much life, I'm not even worried about it. I'd rather exile their creature and get rid of it. Akroma's Will, Jessica's Will, I think some auto includes in a lot of people's red and white decks, and then some big time tutors. The big 3, the best 3 black tutors there are: Imperial Seal, Vampiric Tutor, and Demonic Tutor, allows me to go fishing in my deck for more creatures. So we covered creatures, we covered enchantments, we covered some sorceries and stuff like this, and now it is time for artifacts. Artifacts can act as support. Mana Crypt Jeweled Lotus, currently banned. Maybe when you see this video, it'll be unbanned, though. I think they will be coming off the banned list, so I left them in the deck. These help with mana ramp. If you don't play with banned cards, I do play with banned cards. I don't listen to the banned list. But if you want to swap these out for something, maybe a Mox Opal, maybe a Mox Amber, maybe a Lotus Petal, maybe a Mox Diamond, if you're lucky enough to have one of those. But Mana Ramp, Vanquisher's Banner, that Vampire Anthem thing I talked about. Remember, one of the big 3 themes I'm playing with Markov: get tokens out, pump all your vampires up with Vampire Anthems, and then use all those synergistic cards that when I gain a life, you lose a life, etc. So that helps with the Vampire Anthem. Mana Ramp, Talisman Hierarchy. Talismans are super good, super underrated, really inexpensive card too. Skull Clamp, card draw. I make a 1/1 token, I slap this on it, I can draw a couple of extra cards, right? Card draw is important. More Mana Ramp. The quicker I can get my creatures out, the better. Now you'll notice even in just the artifacts, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 Mana Ramp type cards. Here's 5 Urza's Incubator. It reduces the casting cost of all my vampires. Commander Sphere, there's another mana ramp type card. Arcane Signet, another mana ramp type card. Patchwork Banner, which is dual purposed, acts as an anthem for my vampires, but also some mana ramp. The One Ring, card draw, more mana ramp, an autographed Soul Ring. I love this card. And then Lightning Greaves. Lightning Greaves I want to talk about for a minute because it's not mana ramp, but with Markov, I want him to stay alive as much as possible, especially if I'm attacking. I don't want my commander to be a target for spells. This gives my commander Shroud, which means it can't be the target of spells or abilities. So any commander you keep alive, like Lightning Greaves is almost an auto-include in every single deck to help protect your commander. So that's the meat and potatoes of the Markov deck. But we do have to cover lands because lands are an important part of the game. In this deck, I've got a bunch of dual and tri-type lands. Obviously, Markov has 3 mana sources. We've got the red, the white, the black. We got mountains, plains, swamps. So I want as many of those represented as possible. I got City of Brass, Shadowy Backstreet, Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth. That each land is a swamp in addition to its other land types. I can use that with Cabal Coffers to generate an incredible amount of mana. I think these two always belong in a deck together, especially if you have a lot of swamps, right? Or you're playing heavy black. Karn's Bastion, Proliferate. Why did I put this card in here? Because there are a bunch of cards in my Markov deck that put 1/1 counters on my vampires. I want to be able to double those up, triple them up. And so Karn's Bastion helps with that. All right, here we go. Just go through the ones. Ooh, look at that, Badlands. And that is legit. These are all real cards, cards that I actually own. That's why I'm showing you in this format. Sometimes I see these videos, people put up decks they've made, but they don't own the cards. I actually own all the cards I'm dealing with right now. All right, and we don't play with proxies here. Castle Dracula, not the greatest land, but I mean, it's got to go in the vampire deck, right? Here we go. We're shooting through Command Tower, maybe the best land of all time. And it's funny because in this deck, this is better than this. This will give me any kind of mana. This only gives me 2, but this card's worth about $400. This card's worth, I don't know, $1. All right. Phyrexian Tower, way to create some mana. The Valley of Gorgoroth, the Wasteland, a way to get some removal. Sometimes somebody has a land that you got to take out, so that helps with that. All right, and we cycle through the rest of the lands. Ooh, Cavern of Souls, automatic include in any Kindred Folk type of deck. Here, look at this. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Spend this mana only to cast a creature spell of the chosen type. Well, this is a vampire deck, so this really does work. That spell cannot be countered. So an auto-include in any Kindred type deck. 3 Tree City. This has become an auto-include too. This is a newer land from Bloomborough. But as 3 Tree City enters, choose a creature. We're going to choose vampires. You can add a colorless mana or choose a color. Add an amount of mana of that color equal to the number of creatures you control, the chosen type. So see how see how these synergy works together? So I got this guy. We're making vampire tokens. I got 300 vampire tokens on the board. Man, I get unlimited mana. So this is a great card. Balin's Tomb or Ancient Tomb, right? Turn 1, you can add 2 colorless mana. Like you get this in a Soul Ring in your first hand, it's game over. Fetid Health, Sacred Foundry, Accursed Dunyard. This is a way to regenerate my vampires, and I got a token. So there is my Markov deck. Again, the mana value of this deck is 194. It goes super hard. It goes super fast. It's got all the vampires. It's got multiple win conditions. It's one of my favorite decks. If you want this deck list, go in the show notes. I will link it to my Mox field. This exact deck. This is a deck I play with. This is a deck I love. And thank you for tuning in to an episode of Muscles and Magic the Gathering. Listen, I started playing Magic 30 years ago, and the games got incredibly complex. And so this video series is just going to do 2 things for you, right? Number 1, it's going to show you the passion I have for Magic, and absolutely, it allows me to do something that I really, really love. But 2, I want to explain Magic in simple terms for people. When I was getting into Commander, I had to work so hard to learn all the ins and outs. You can watch these videos. You can learn how to build a strong, powerful deck. learn why. Maybe you'll learn some new combos and we have a little fun. So thank you for stopping by. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, turn your notifications on, and we'll see you for the next episode of this. And if you have any commanders you want me to go over, listen, I've got 53 dedicated commander decks right now. The goal is to get to 100, but chances are I play with that commander and I've got a great deck. So if you have a commander you want me to go over, leave it in the comments and I will get right to it. Thanks for coming to Muscles and Magic the Gathering.